Okay, so we took the little break from chapter 2 material to remember how to factor, because today we're learning about the factored form of quadratic functions. So the factored form is y equals x plus or minus b times y equals x plus or minus a, right? Basically what we were working with before. This is factored form, right? It's standard form that's been factored out. So that's what we're doing today, okay? And remember, so the other thing we noted is that sometimes it's not always just x. It could be like 6x plus 1 times x plus 1. That's also factored. So let's deal with this one. This first example says to find the factored form and zeros of y equals x squared plus 2x minus 8. So here it's telling us this is the main reason we have factored form, because it helps us find all the zeros, right? All of the places where y equals 0, essentially. So let's think about this, and I'm going to write this over here. So c is negative 8. So we know a times b has to be negative 8. And then that also means when we add a and b, it should sum up to 2. So right away, I'm thinking about all the things I can multiply to get 8. And 4 and 2 are sticking out to me, because I can see that if I multiply positive 4 times negative 2, I get the negative 8, and if I add those, I get 2. So you'll start seeing these quickly in your head. So I know that the factored form is going to be x plus 4 times x minus 2, right? And you can check that if you need to. X squared minus 2x plus 4x minus 8. Yeah, that works out. So we found the factored form, but now it says to find the zeros. So the zeros are when y equals 0. So if I set y equal to 0, it would be 0 equals x plus 4 times x minus 2. So now think about this. If the product of these two, if you think of these as two parts or two numbers, the product of these two things has to be 0. The only way to get 0 as the product is that one of these has to be 0. So there's only two possible ways to make one of them 0. If x plus 4 equals 0, or if x minus 2 equals 0. Now if we solve for x equals negative 4, whoops, take that away, x equals negative 4 and x equals 2. So these are our two zeros. And I can show you that quickly on the graph so you can see how that works out. So let's do x squared where's my squared? X squared plus 2x minus 8. Okay, so now let's trace. So if you go to second trace, which is calc, you can find the zeros here. So it's asking for the left bound, so you could also trace, but I just want to show you this. So here's my left bound, here's my right bound. So then it says guess. Yes, I want you to guess. So you can see there's a 0 at negative 4, which is what we found. And then the function also equals 0 at, and I can just trace for this one, also equals 0 here at 2. And you can see it's not showing me 2, so I can always go to second value when x is 2, y is 0. Yes, so we found our zeros by not having to graph. Okay, sometimes it'll ask you to solve for x. So in this case, it's x squared plus x equals 42. Okay, so how could we solve for this? Let's just rewrite it. Let's actually get everything on the left side, right? So if I subtract 42, I have x squared plus x minus 42 equals 0. So I am setting myself up exactly like I did here. Now I can solve for x the same way. So I know a times b has to be negative 42. And I know a plus b has to be 1. Okay. So what things can I multiply together that are going to give me 1? Well, I've noted the only thing I can think of is 7 and 6, right? So 7 and 6 gives me 42. I need one of them to be negative, but I want the sum to be positive, so I'm going to leave the 7 positive so it's bigger and make that negative. So that means my factored form is x plus 7 and x minus 6. Quick check. X squared minus 6x plus 7x. Yep, that's 1. And then 7 times negative 6 is negative 42. Yes. Okay. Now, this whole thing equals 0, so I actually wrote this wrong. It's not y equals, it's 0 equals, because it was already set up when I solved it that way. So there's only two possible ways to make this side of the equation equals 0. It's if x plus 7 equals 0 or if x minus 6 equals 0. So that means x can be minus 7 and x can be positive 6. Those are the two solutions to that equation. Let's try another one that's got an a. 2x squared equals negative 9x plus 5. Okay, let's move everything to one side. So that would become that, right? Just moved everything over here to the left. So I know, what do I know? Well, I know I need to get a times b to be negative 5, but then when I add them, it should be 9. So you can do that trick we learned about before, but here's how I do it. This one's a little easy because it's 2. So I know in my head one of these has to be 2x and one of these has to be x because that's the only way I'm getting 2x squared, 2 times 1, right? Now I have to figure out what goes on. What's the plus or minus a and what's the plus or minus b? Okay, so how can I get 5? Well, I can only get 5 one way, 5 and 1. So does it make sense if I put the 5 here or the 1 here? So I'm going to get a pencil and I'm just going to try it. So I know I want a 9. So because I want this 9, I'm thinking it might make sense for the 5 to go here because 2 times 5 is 10. That's getting me closer to 9, right? Because my other one is 1. So now I'm thinking I need a minus. So one of these has to be plus and one of these has to be minus. That's the only way I'm going to end up with a negative here. And I want the middle term to be positive, so that I'm going to make this bigger because 2x times 5 is 10x. Which is then if I take away an x, it's going to give me that 9, and this is minus 5. So that's how I work through it in my head. I just kind of lay out what things have to be, and I try different numbers out. And I can check this. 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times 5 is 10x minus, it's minus x. That's minus 5. Yeah, this works out because that comes out to 9x, which is what we wanted it to be, positive 9x, right? All right, so if these are two equations and they are expressions or parts or whatever, they have to be multiplied together to make 0. That means 2x minus 1 has to be 0 or x plus 5 can be 0, right? That's the only way you can make 0. So that would mean that 2x equals 1, x has to be 1/2 here, and x has to be negative 5. So these are the two values for y equals 0. Okay, next one, word problem. I'm going to read it to you from the book. You have to write it all. So it says, Marco hits a golf ball into the air from the 3rd level of a driving range that is 48 feet high. So he's standing up here, 48 feet above the ground. The function h of t equals negative 16t squared plus 32t plus 48 gives the height in feet of the golf ball t seconds after it's hit into the air. Okay, so it's a parabola. It's going up and it's eventually going to come back down. So when will the ball hit the ground? So I wrote the function here. When will the ball hit the ground? The ball will hit the ground when h of t, or the height, is 0. So let's set this whole thing equal to 0. Okay, now you guys know how to do this. We just need to factor this and we'll be able to solve for it. So the one thing I noticed right away is I see 16, 32, and 48. So I'm thinking I can factor that out first before I factor the whole equation. So this would be t squared, right? If I take out minus 16, this would become minus 2t. And that would become a plus 3. Minus 3. So let me check my signs. Yeah, negative 16. Negative times negative, yeah, that gives me positive. Negative times negative, yeah, that gives me positive 48. Okay, so I factored out the 16. So now I'm just going to deal with trying to make my factored pair for this expression in between. Take t squared minus 2t minus 3. So I know I'm going to have a t and a t. And it's going to be plus or minus some other number on each part. So now I'm thinking of negative 3. There's only two numbers that I can multiply to get 3. 3 and 1. Okay? And it needs to be negative, so one of these is going to be positive and one of these is going to be negative. That's the only way I can end up with a negative here. So now I'm looking at, so I know I'm thinking about 3 times 1. Now I just have to decide if the 3 should go with a negative sign or the 3 should go with a positive sign. So then I look at my middle term. My middle term is, remember, when I add these two numbers. So when I add these two numbers, I want the result to come out to be negative. That's telling me that I want my 3 to be attached to the negative and my 1 to be attached to the positive, because then I end up with t squared minus 3t plus 2t minus 3, which works out. Okay, so there's only 3 ways to make this thing 0. If negative 16 equals 0, well, that's not possible. If t plus 1 equals 0, it's possible. Or if t minus 3 equals 0. That means here t equals negative 1 and here t equals 3. So when will the ball hit the ground? Well, t is seconds. So now I'm thinking this one doesn't make sense because this is time. We don't have negative seconds. So the ball will hit the ground at t equals 3 seconds. One more example today, which reminds me of something we do in calculus, so you guys are going to love it. So we have y equals x squared minus 2x minus 3. And the question is, when is the function positive? So that means when is it above the x-axis? When are the y values positive? So what we can do is we can factor this thing. Let's factor it first because it's going to help us. So I know one's going to be an x and another's going to be an x. And then I have 2 minuses. So the only way to make a minus is if one is positive and one is negative. So I'm in the same situation here. I've got a 3. This is like exactly like our last one, right? So I want the 3 to be negative, but I also want the middle term to be negative. So I'm going to put the 3 here and the 1 there, right? Exactly like the last problem. So just like before, we know that x equals minus 1 and x equals 3 are the zeros. So what I'm going to do, and this is a parabola, so that's where they cross the x-axis. So this means if I'm going to draw a number line of x. So if I have x equals negative 1 and x equals 3, I could imagine if this is a parabola, it would either be coming down like that or going up like that. So then I could look here, and I know A is positive, so I know it's going down, it's opening up, right? So that means my positive areas are going to be negative infinity to negative 1, and then again from 3 to infinity. Down in between is when it's negative. But say you wanted to prove that with some math, right? You could explain that in words, but you could also do some test points. So here, if I wanted to prove that, I could test a point that's left of negative 1, so I could test negative 2. Here, I could test something between negative 1 and 3, so I'm going to test when x equals 0. And then over here, I need to test something greater than 3, so let's test x equals 4. So then all you're doing when you're testing is plugging that number in. So if I plug in negative 2, I'd end up with y equals negative 2 squared is 4, negative 2 times negative 2 is plus 4 minus 3. So I don't even care about the value. I'm just looking at this and I can tell you it's positive. 4 plus 4 is 8. 8 minus 3 is 5. So it's a positive value. What about if I test 0? Y would be 0 minus 3. Well, that would be negative. And if I test 4, plugging it up here, 4 squared is 16 minus 8 minus 3. So hopefully you can see that that is going to be positive, right? 16 minus 8 is 8, 8 minus 3 is 5. So what have I done here? I've proven where the function is positive. So we would say the function is positive on negative infinity to negative 1 and 3 to infinity. All right, that's all for today.